late, but I think we're going to do things back to back from now on, so a lot of people, they want to attend most of the lectures today before they leave a little bit later at night. So because we don't have an hour for presentations, so we cancel this part from the schedule. We'll have this lecture, then the workshop, and then the lecture after this, and then we will have our vespers and the dinner and so on. Now is George.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen.
All right, so we'll begin. We'll talk about the, I don't know if I'm going to call this the climax of the science and religion kind of discussion. The truth behind the theory of evolution. But before we begin, it is always important to do what? Define our terms, to make sure that we are all talking and referring to the same thing. Because when I say the word evolution, it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. There's micro, there's macro, there's theistic, there's Darwinism, there's Darwinian, there's neo-Darwinian. So there's a lot of different expressions of evolution. So there's, I can't possibly cover everything, of course, in 45, 50 minutes. So what I mean when I say the theory behind, or the truth behind the theory of evolution, I am referring to Darwinian evolution. Okay? Darwinian evolution, which is the most common in the academic world. Okay, Darwinian evolution. Now are we all clear on this? And we're not going to touch on theistic evolution because we did that extensively. The truth behind the theory of evolution. Some proponents of the theory of evolution, and now this is kind of not going to say quiz, but do you know who these people? Do you know who this person is? Charles Darwin himself. John Paul Sartre, existentialist.
Mark.
No, Friedrich Nietzsche, German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. You just said it, someone just said it.
Mark.
Karl Marx, okay, Marxism.
Freud.
Freud, Sigmund Freud, and obviously,
Adolf.
you know all. So, all of these people are proponents of the theory of evolution, and you can draw some commonalities between all of those proponents. Commonalities between all of them. There's impact of this. There is kind of like an intro of the theory of evolution and its impact on our society, impact on our ideology and academics, and so on and so forth. From politics to science to religion to education to media, even sports. You name it, every facet of society has been impacted one way or another by Darwinian evolution. Also impact on ideology or schools of thought. Communism, materialism, atheism, relativism, pluralism, humanism, naturalism, and postmodernism have been influenced by the theory of evolution. A lot of isms. But these are schools of thoughts and ideologies that have been influenced by the theory of Darwinian evolution. Let me give you some historical background so that we can educate ourselves on how did it all come about. It all began with a movement called secular humanism. Secular humanism. A movement at the time of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, a philosophic movement called secular humanism began to emerge. And it came in the late 1500s as a reaction against medieval theology. Basically, from a historical perspective, and I mentioned to you, I think I may have mentioned to you yesterday, I forget it was this conference, or when I talked about the Industrial Revolution, did I mention that yesterday? And how that gave rise to the man as viewed as a superman, a superpower, and he needs to kind of transcend beyond medieval theology, beyond God, And this secular, the slogan for humanism as a philosophy is, man is the measure of all things. And that's kind of the mission statement, or the slogan for humanism. Man is the measure of all things, and that philosophy caught like wildfire in this era. Humanism emphasized man's attempt to exert mastery over nature. Okay? From that came another ideology called scientism, which is different from science, which is using science as the source of truth. The effect of humanism was to help man break free from any divine knowledge or religious knowledge. I want to be independent of anything. So this is important for us to understand how Darwin and his theory, the environment that Darwin was in, okay, and the philosophies and the ideologies that led Darwin to come up with an explanation for how did we exist, kind of thing. You see? Because of the movement, and he kind of went on with that movement to develop his theory in his book. Anyone knows his famous book? The Origin of Species. That's Darwin's book on the theory of evolution. So, Darwinian evolution in brief. Charles Darwin was born in England and spent 5 years on a ship commissioned to survey the coast of South America. And his experience led him to formulate the theory of evolution. He called it descent with modification. It was said that he saw some fossils, and then he came with this theory of, well, you know what, I believe, that there is a transitional fossil that may explain that we actually were not created, but we have evolved from other beings, and there is a link somewhere, although I haven't found it, but it's the missing link that links this species to this species, and they all came from what's called a common ancestor. A common ancestor. And that is what he means by descent with modification. Two components of his theory. I'm basically summarizing Darwin's theory in 3 slides, so forgive me if I am being too general, but time will not allow to be specific. All forms of life, including human beings, descended from a common ancestor by gradual modification. That's one pillar on the temple of Darwinism. Okay? The mechanism of this gradual modification is called natural selection. So 2 components. There's the descent with modification, common ancestor, and the natural selection, or in other words, natural selection is basically the survival of the fittest. Okay? Might makes right. If you're strong, then you can trample over the weak, and I'll tell you a funny story about that later. Okay. Darwinian evolution. Oops. Natural selection is an impersonal force. One of the tenets or creeds of Darwinian evolution. Natural selection is an impersonal force. This is very key. Impersonal force that really means might makes right. Okay, I'm quoting what he said. That which survives is selected to continue life, while those too weak to survive are exterminated by their own ineptitude. I speak to many Darwinian evolutionists, and they say that if you're stupid, excuse my language, if you're stupid, then you're one of those weak that eventually will just kind of wither away, because someone who's more intelligent than you will trample you, and he or she will be more the selected of this modification process or adaptation process. And they do believe in such things. Micro versus macro evolution, these are the 2 delineations or distinctions that I will share with you. I'm not going to go through all the other forms. But can you tell me briefly the difference between micro and macro in general? Anyone? Huh? Yes, small and large, but it's good. That gives you an indication of what they mean.
Is micro from the same species?
I'm sorry, 1 second. Now. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Is micro adapting from the same, or evolving from the same species, but macro is evolving from one species to another?
Excellent. Very good. George, Tony, very good. Very good. Where's George? Oh, yeah, okay. Excellent. Can you repeat what you just said again out loud so we can all learn?
Micro is evolving from evolving from the same species just to like an evolved from the same a bird, like it's still a bird but it has like a different beak. But macro is from like a bird to like a different animal, like a different species.
You're awesome. Very good explanation. So that precisely. Someone had his hand up, or do you have anything different? Okay.
Well, no,
Yes.
that was great. That was great.
Okay, you're good? Better be. Okay. So minor changes within a living organism. Okay, and it usually has to do with adaptation. Okay, adaptation. Macro, living species related to one another by common descent, and that's the descent. These two pictures will explain exactly what I mean. Oops. Microevolution is within the same species, and this actually, we have no problem, we as in biblically and our church, we have no problem with microevolution. You can actually get a German Shepherd with a Pit Bull, or whatever, two different types of dogs, same species dogs, and you can breed them. Actually, we have, if you get a donkey and a horse, Mule. Okay, I didn't know. Okay, so we do see that. We do see that. But macroevolution says what? You know, across species. So the elephant at one point was a crocodile. At one point was a deer, and so on and so forth. Across species. What's the reasoning behind this? That we all have come from the same ancestor. So, do we have a problem with this? Very minimal, very small problem. What's the reasoning behind this? That there are some similarities in their DNA makeup. That's what they say. But here's the answer to that. Similarities in the DNA makeup doesn't necessarily follow to say that we have a common ancestor, but we have a common creator. See? Who is God? But that's him whom they're trying to deny. So they're not going to use him as the conclusion for their theory. You see what I'm saying? That's macro versus micro in brief. Again, I'm trying to be as brief as possible to move on with the discussion. Basic assumptions of the evolution theory. Some basic foundational assumptions that they adhere to. Number one, non-living things give rise to living things. Non-living things give rise to living things, and that's called spontaneous generation. In other words, you get some protein, bacteria, and molecules here and there, and three things: time plus matter plus chance. Give it enough time, enough components, matter plus chance, and then here you are. You see? So they believe that we were created from non-living, inanimate meaning non-living objects. Number two, which is really the core of their belief. No presence. This is what they want to get to. No presence of an external agent. In other words, no creator. You cannot tell me that there's a creator, because that's the reason why I came up with my theory. And number three, the universe evolved from particles to people. How would you like to feel when I tell you that you were somehow formulated in a primordial soup and slime somewhere? And that's what they say. Primordial soup basically made up who you are. Wow. How does that speak to my worth, to my essence, to my value? You see? How? What would make you more intelligent than I am? Why would I listen to you and not to anybody else? Or why would you not listen to me if we both came from the same protein and bacteria? You see? What would make you more valuable than mine? What would make Mother Teresa or St. Anthony better than Hitler? They both came from the same primordial soup. You cannot differentiate between right and wrong. Okay, here's what they said. Origin of the universe, origin of the earth. Here's the primordial soup, the slime, they call it. Okay. And then RNA, DNA, bacteria, first cells, primitive animals, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. Then you get to the lower primates, monkeys, early apes, hominids, and then humans. So this is how basically this is evolution, Darwinian evolution in short, in brief. And this is what they say, the age of the invertebrates, age of fish, amphibians, reptiles, and age of mammals. That's evolution right there for you. Now, what are the challenges to this theory? And this is basically the bulk of our discussion. What are the challenges to evolution? You tell me. I have about 6. Can you tell me a couple, please?
Missing links.
Missing links.
Yeah.
What else? Good one. Yes, sir.
Fossil records.
Fossil records. What else? Yes,
My
ma'am.
major one is if everything wants to go to entropy, how on earth can you go from an amoeba to this complex?
I love your chemistry background. Very good. Okay, well, very good. This is good. This is 3 out of 6. Oh, no. Huh?
This will be more information.
It would be more of evolutions, exactly. I think that was the answer His Holiness Pope Shenouda, I remember, said is his very concise answer to this question. He said, if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? You see? Yeah, which is very logical. It makes sense. Why are there all monkeys? Not only that, but why haven't we evolved into the next level? What makes you think that we are the kind of the cream of the crop? Why didn't we evolve? شفت حد beyond human? But if evolution is true, then we should have evolved into Superman or whatever. Okay. Some challenges to the theory. Number 1, evolution, and this is the one thing no Darwinian evolutionists can't have an answer for, and I challenge any person who believes in Darwinian evolution to provide an answer for this. They don't, because they don't have one. The origin of the universe. Do you remember this slide? Well, wait a minute. You're beginning here, but what about this? Where is the origin? Where did this come from? The origin of the universe. Well, where did it come from? Here's what I'd like to say. Natural selection may help explain the survival of species, but not the arrival of species. Natural selection will help you understand or explain the survival of species, not the arrival of species. Where did it all come from? Can you provide an answer? You can't, because there's no answer. Can they provide an answer? They can't, because there's no answer. 2 options for origin. No one created the world out of nothing. Someone created the world out of nothing. Which of you is more plausible and reasonable? You decide for yourself. No one created the world out of nothing. Wait a minute, there's a logical fallacy. No one created the world out of nothing. That's atheism, evolutionist. Someone created the world out of nothing. Theistic worldview. All right. Challenge number 2. I think you mentioned it. Sure, I think you mentioned that. No transitional fossils found. Then I have a little video clip that will explain what I mean. Oops, maybe in the next couple slides. The fossil records must demonstrate a sequence of fully functional intermediate forms. Have you? Some claim, just to be honest, in presenting this to you, some claim that there were some transitional forms found in Australia or here and there, very, very, scarce. That's what I was looking for. Very scarce. Yeah, maybe a couple of, and they're not. When this was studied and investigated, they didn't turn out to be real transitional forms. They were actually. I was just watching a video on this, and I think I have it here for you. They were not actually transitional forms from species to species within the same species, but they have evolved into what's called adaptation. So within the same species. So it was within the micro evolution kind of realm, not macro. It hasn't yet been proven. And let me show you. Here's the video.
most important of these alleged transitional forms was the fossil of a fish called the coelacanth. For years, evolutionists claimed that this creature, which was only known in the fossil record, had characteristics similar to those of land-dwelling animals. It had, they argued, primitive legs and a primitive lung. These evolutionist claims about the coelacanth were advanced as a scientific fact, and imaginary drawings picturing the animal crawling onto land from water made their way even to textbooks. It came as a great shock to evolutionists when a living example of the supposedly extinct coelacanth was caught in the Indian Ocean in 1938. It was then seen that the fish was no different from the fish of our day. Contrary to the claims of evolutionists, coelacanths had neither legs nor primitive lungs. What was worse, the coelacanth, supposedly a creature readying itself to make the leap from sea to land, was in reality a fish that lived only in the deep waters of the oceans, never approaching to within 180 meters of the surface. Another alleged transitional form has been a fossil bird called Archaeopteryx. For decades, evolutionists argued that this creature was an intermediary between reptiles and birds. However, the seventh Archaeopteryx fossil, discovered in 1992, revealed that the creature had a sternum. That is, the chest bone essential for flight muscles. This proved that the animal was a perfect flying bird. The evolutionist claims about the claw-like nails on the wings of the Archaeopteryx also failed, since similar structures were also discovered in modern birds like the moaxin. Because of such reasons, one of the foremost defenders of the theory of evolution, the Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, had to admit that Archaeopteryx could not be considered as a transitional form.
You know what this reminds me of? If you've read the book of The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, he said at the very end of his book, he said, in light of the avalanche of evidence that points towards God, Christ, it would take me much greater faith to maintain my atheism than to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. Really, it will take the evolutionist greater faith to believe in this than to believe in God, because his attributes are what? Clearly seen in his creation, clearly seen. Whereas you're hanging on your whole theory, two little feathers and anyway, it's almost comical. It's almost comical. But then you understand the reason. I think we talked about this earlier today. We understand the reason. Let's move on. Here's Stephen Jay Gould, who's and if you want to read anything about evolution, I recommend him as an authority figure, and he's excellent. The extreme rareness, that's the word I was looking for earlier. Rareness of transitional forms in the fossil records persists as the trade secret of paleontology, which is the study of fossils. Evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference. The rest is what? Inference. Okay? That is not deductive reason. That's not deductive. This doesn't give you proof, solid proof, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. Not the evidence of fossils. All right, let's move on. University of Chicago paleontologist, he spent most of his life studying fossils, not someone who read a chapter about fossils. I mean, he invested his life, he studied the fossil record and the diversity of life on Earth. He says, we are now 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil records has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but the situation hasn't changed much. We have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. And this guy spent his life studying fossils. All right, so it's not so much that there are missing links. There are actually what? Missing chains, and that's different. You see? It's not missing links, it's missing chains. All right, challenge number 3. So let's review the challenges. Number 1 is the where did it all come from? Number 2, fossil records. Number 3, life coming from non-life. Non-life cannot produce life. According to the law of biogenesis, living things come only from other living things. And this is a scientific law. In other words, no inanimate object can give rise to a living being. This is just a law that you cannot falsify. A law of science you can't falsify. Also, someone by the name of Michael Behe, he wrote a book, I think it's called Darwin's Black Box, and he spoke extensively on irreducible complexity in the cell. Yeah, I'm going to move on from this because I think I want to share with you what's coming next. Life from non-life, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The law of biogenesis says life cannot come from non-life. And then we have life. So we must have had an originator of life. And that's the complexity of the cell, about the irreducible complexity. Let's again move on. Challenge number 4. Now we get into the philosophy and stuff I love. Evolution does not explain the source of morality. Meaning, remember I told you earlier about Hitler and St. Anthony, or Hitler and Mother Teresa? Evolution cannot differentiate between good and bad. Okay. Objective moral laws do exist. I'm kind of using William Lane Craig's kind of argument. Existing of moral laws imply the existence of a what? A moral lawgiver. Okay? And I'm not going to talk about morality and relative or moral relativism, but when I was having a discussion with, again, an atheist about morality, and I told him, where did your sense of right and wrong come from? He goes, culture. And that's very common. Culture, this culture says this is wrong, and this culture says this is right, and I get my moral law from culture. I said, good. Culture is made up of what? People. No, people. Who makes up societies? Who makes up societies? People, individuals. So, if I follow your logic, individuals, it's just a group of individuals called society, individuals made up what's right and what's wrong. Then if what's right and what's wrong was instituted by people, it can also be dismissed by people. In other words, I could just choose to say, you know what, I think stealing is okay. Hey, I made up the rule that stealing is wrong. Why don't I make up the same rule? Stealing is okay. If it came from me, then I can overrule it. You see? But I feel that this moral law did not come from me, but it came to me. Different propositions. That's the whole problem with prepositions. Prepositions, okay? So just replace the from to. Moral laws did not come from me, but they came to me. That's why I feel compelled to obey them. You feel like you have something in you that pushes you to the good, and that's what St. Paul says in Romans chapter 2 of the conscience. The conscious. All right. Here's the example. All right. I can't help it. I'm only a primate. If humans are genetically determined, how can they be held legally or morally responsible for their behavior? I can just walk outside right now, find this nice, wonderful, beautiful and BMW and get my key and just key the whole car and say, hey, you know what? I think what I'm doing is right. You cannot say this is wrong. Well, no, this is wrong. Well, who's to say? I'm only a primate. I'm not governed by anything that's beyond me. Do you see what I'm saying? Challenge number 5. This is my favorite one. So please listen to this. Evolution cannot explain intelligence from non-intelligence. And this is very logical. Let me explain. Does microevolution occur Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Dog breeding is an example of microevolution, right? But here's my question. Microevolution occurs in short time. An intelligent humans, I shouldn't say I, we as intelligent beings can what? Intervene in a microevolutionary process. Can we not? Of course we can. And we are intelligence. So, this is macroevolution over a long time. This is breeding over a short time. My question to you, if intelligence, listen to this, if intelligent breeding meets genetic limits, how can non-intelligence exceed them? Do you see my point? If my intelligent breeding of dogs meets genetic limits, I cannot get a dog and an elephant and make them breed. Can I? Well, you can't. It hasn't been found. And who's doing the breeding? Intelligence. How can intelligence meet limitation when non-intelligence exceeds them and goes beyond the micro to the macro? Do you get it? It doesn't make sense. Do you see? It doesn't make sense. All right. Challenge number 6. Evolution cannot explain the purpose and meaning of life. Now, this again, we appeal to the philosophy, and I want to mention something to you. I think I may have mentioned it to some of you. When you're, and this is more on, let's kind of regroup, think apologetics. You want to share your faith and defend your faith. Some folks have what I call the one-size-fits-all answer to everything, or approach. But you, as equipped defenders of the faith, you must understand the person or the group that you're talking to and use the appropriate entry point. In other words, if the person is heavy on philosophy, then let's talk about absolute truth. If the person is heavy on biology or chemistry, well, let's talk about evolution, okay? If the person is heavy on the emotional, the touchy-feely kind of thing, well, let's talk about meaning in life. Do you see? Whichever avenue you select and choose, of course with wisdom, you will end up with the answer, God. Do you get it? See? So use discernment on the approach of your apologetic method. Evolution cannot explain the purpose and meaning of life. There's no overarching meaning, no script to the play. We're all basically just dancing to whatever chemistry that is in us. We're dancing to the reaction of those chemicals, and there's no overarching script in this play. Some evolutionists and what they say about the meaning of life. This is quotations. So from John Paul Sartre to evolutionists and existentialists, it's meaningless that we are born. It's meaningless that we die. George Bernard Shaw, he said, life is a disease, and the only difference between one man and another is the stage of the disease at which he lives. How uplifting. Richard Dawkins, listen to this. He goes, humans have always wondered about the meaning of life. Life has no higher purpose than to perpetuate the survival of DNA. Life has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's what Richard Dawkins said about meaning in life. Pretty strong. But you know what? At least I admire their honesty, because their worldview and their philosophy compels them to say this, drives them to say this. I mean, there's no case to be made about evolution anymore. You don't need to examine the evidence. You can examine the byproduct. You see? The byproduct of the evidence. In summary, doesn't explain the origin of the universe. No credible transitional fossils. Life cannot come from non-life. No objective morality can be explained by evolution, and we cannot explain intelligence. And we cannot give meaning to, it doesn't give us meaning in life. Oh, I didn't mean to put that, I guess, someone was saying to this lady, you know the difference between these two chimps? In public school, I can only say one of them was made by an intelligent creator. It's very true. You can only say this one was made by an intelligent creator because someone drew this picture, but you cannot say this one was. And he doesn't need to put that picture, I don't know. And I think His Grace, Yusuf talked to us this morning about Herbert Spencer when he said everything in the universe can be explained by the 5 basic things: space, matter, time, force, and action. And in Genesis 1, in the beginning time, God, force, created action, the heavens, space, and earth. And this is what Sayyidina mentioned to us earlier today about Genesis. I would like to actually, this is what I wanted to share with you also. I personally am a big fan of this quotation and this writer. Okay, let's. Can you read it for us out loud, please? Yeah, just to give my voice a break. Can you read this for us out loud?
Someone once said that if you set 1,000,000 monkeys at 1,000,000 typewriters for 1,000,000 years, one of them would eventually type all of Hamlet by chance. But when we find the text of Hamlet, we don't wonder whether it came from chance. Why then does the atheist use that incredibly improbable explanation for the universe? Clearly because it is his only chance of remaining an atheist. At this point, we need a psychological explanation of the atheist rather than a logical explanation of the universe. We have a logical explanation of the universe, but the atheist doesn't like it. It's called God.
I love it. I personally love this because it just says it. Thank you for reading this. It says it perfectly. It is no longer a logical explanation that we need to provide. It's more like a psychological.
Where'd you get that quote from?
Peter Kreeft. He is an apologist, a Catholic scholar. He is the professor of philosophy in Boston College. Beautiful explanation as to the root, again, or the real issue is. All right, I'll for the sake of time. Richard Dawkins says, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. In other words, thank God for Darwin, because now I can hang my ideology on something and appear to be intellectual. All right, I want to read to you a story of the mice and the piano. Just 3 slides, and then we're going to end the discussion. Just 3 slides. But I want you to pay attention to this story, because what I'd like to always give is not so much discussing the subjects, but the underlying issues, and to kind of put it in perspective. So I'm going to read to you the story, and I want you to pay attention to the mice and the piano. Once upon a time, there was a family of mice who had lived all their lives in a large piano. Every day in their piano world, they heard the beautiful music of the instrument, filling all the dark spaces with pleasant sound and harmony. At first, the mice were impressed by it. They drew comfort and wonder from the thought that there was someone who played the music, invisible to them, yet close to them. They loved to think of the great player whom they could not see. Then one day, a daring young mouse named Charles, climbed up part of the piano and returned thinking, I have discovered how the music was made. Tightly stretched wires were the secret. He wrote a book about his discovery and called it The Origin of Music. At first, Charlie's theory was met with resistance, but eventually it became the predominant view of where the music was coming from. The mice had to revise all their old, outdated beliefs. None but the most conservative mice could any longer believe in the great pianist. The really cool mice designed Charlie stickers, if you know what I mean, and wore them with pride to show the rest of the mice that they were not narrow-minded. The player came to be thought of as a myth. All the while, the pianist continues to play. That's evolution. That's evolution for you. Doesn't matter, you come up with this, I aha, I now know where we came from. God, creator of this world, who have come to die for my sake and your sake, is continuing to play in this world. Our rejection of him does not make anything less of his presence, omnipresence. With that, I think I don't have any. Oh, glory be to God forever. Amen. Any comments or questions or thoughts? Yeah, and I hope I didn't do a disservice to the subject of evolution in discussing it in 40 or so minutes. But again, just giving you a general idea. Any comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
So again, how, like they study evolution and Darwin theory in science in high school. How can the youth address that? How can they say that that's not right? How can they talk with the teachers? It's part of science, it's part of the curriculum.
Yeah, very good question. I think this this touches on evangelism and sharing your faith. I find, and I may have mentioned that also last year, so forgive me for being redundant, but I find that the most effective way, where's John? John, I think you were talking to your teacher earlier about the most effective way I personally have discovered is not to say much, but to ask much. You see? Ask. But for you to ask, you have to understand the subject matter and what questions you ask when, and obviously how. You see? We are not in the business of really convincing people and shoving down our faith, or shoving our faith down their throat. It doesn't work this way, and Christ never did that. Because we have Christ as our model for evangelism. But what the technique that he used, you know how many questions Christ asked in the 4 Gospels? Just come up, give me a number. Questions, he asked questions. How many? Not 500. 153 questions. That's a lot of questions. So it is an apologetic method that is extremely effective. Why? So I hope I'm getting to your question.
But the thing is, these are high school students.
Uh-huh.
They are not into apologetics. They haven't really read or studied. These are learning science.
Right. I think we may undermine their intelligence if we equip them, not even before high school. Believe me, you can do that. I mean, we do have apologetic curriculums for junior high.
College, and it took him 2 years to stand up.
Well, why do we have to wait? Why do we have to wait? We can actually begin earlier, and it doesn't have to be rich in philosophy. We can always, give the right amount of dosage to the right audience. But you equip them and don't undermine their intelligence. And that's what apologetics is all about, equipping you and your children to be able to, not to preach, at least ask the right questions. And that's it. That's what you need to do. You don't need to convert someone, but ask the right questions. And you have, asking questions opens up the assumptions of the questioner. When I am the professor, for example, and your biology professor, you could have just asked some questions to expose her assumptions, her faulty assumptions. You can ask questions so that she can then basically research or try to understand the answers and put a stone in her shoe kind of thing, make her uncomfortable, so that she can come up with the answer herself, which is far more convincing than if the answer you give her. You see? It's a psychological thing. So ask questions, you can begin with them. But when you're asked a question that you have an answer for that's logical and convincing, of course, you don't shy away from providing answers. But a method that I encourage for all of you, including the high school students that goes into classes as such, ask questions. Here's an example. A high school student can say, "Oh, teacher, where did life come from?" That's it. And let her explain. You see? Wasn't there a story about a young boy who became, is it Newton, or who about the existence of God? Wasn't there? Huh?
Yeah, Einstein.
Einstein. Yeah. He asked the teacher a couple of questions about the existence of God, and he said, "Well, do you see? I don't see your brain," or something like that. That means you have no brain. How does it? Somebody had his hand up. Yes, sir.
What if you're scared for your grade in the class?
Oh, that's a good question.
Forget the grade.
No, not forget the grade. No, you can't do that.
Well,
semester is over.
That's a tough question. Maybe Sayyidina can help answer this question. What if, do you mind if I get your wisdom? What if you're going to get an F and flunk the exam?
I think we should not operate out of fear. Fear lies within us, not outside us. So number one, we should not operate out of fear. This number one. Number two, we are not in theological seminary, so we argue. The teacher here, her role or his role is actually to teach evolution. It is a curriculum. But I don't think they ask you to believe in evolution. There is a big difference between teaching evolution and believing in evolution. So, if they asked you to believe in it, that's actually against the Constitution of the United States. And if she failed you because you don't believe in it, that's against the Constitution. But you may learn the theory, nothing wrong with that, without believing in it. So I learned the theory. Even when I answer in exam, I can say, according to Charles Darwin, so and so and so and so. This doesn't mean I believe in it. I'm just stating what he said in the theory of the evolution.
Very good. Thank you, Sid. Does that satisfy your?
Yes.
Good, good.
Just answering it too. I think you answered it when you said like you asked a question, so it's how you ask the question and when you ask it. So like the teacher's not going to fail you if you seem like you genuinely want to know where he's coming from. And
yes, very good point. Very good point. And how you ask respectfully, you ask with love and genuineness. I like to say this when people that want to share their faith and preach and all, they develop the message of love. They deliver the message of love packaged with something that has nothing to do with love. One proverb, I think it's a Hindu proverb that says it's no use for you to give someone a rose to smell after you've cut off their nose. In other words, you cannot give me the message of love in a very hateful way. So the message of Christ is a message of love. It needs to be delivered with love. So I appreciate that you mentioned that.
And by the way, if
Yes,
this
sir.
teacher is really respectful, she'll be very proud that you stood up against her.
Yeah, I would like to think that, but it's, some are very antagonistic, Sharia, but
a lot of professors like that.
yeah, I've had some difficult ones maybe. Yes, for sure. Sorry.
I think as far as maybe like high school level students kind of answering that question, we know the limits from the theory that you just explained, George. So we don't have to be afraid to engage with the theory. If we understand the limitations, we can ask. And even maybe getting outside the question, does God exist? And yes, I know I'm saying that in an apologetics conference, but the situation with Jean, for example, is that he found himself in a situation where the teacher was actually, pushing and kind of questioning, his beliefs. So he had a right to defend himself. But in a high school setting, you have a question about the theory of evolution. Don't be afraid to engage based on the limitations. So, for example, isn't it true that there are limits in a fossil record? How does that explain changes from species to species? What difference do species have, like, say, the beaks between two birds, and we say that the difference between like two noses on two different people is not evolutionary? How do you explain that? Try to relate it to something relatable to you, but don't be afraid to engage in the limitations. That way, you're not really being controversial. You're being intellectually honest, actually, as a student, and you're not, you're not being defensive or anything like that.
Very good. Well said. Well said. Yes, Regents.
I'm kind of confused why they teach it in school, like they know all the limitations.
Yeah.
Why do they teach it in schools it's almost as a fact?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah. I'll tell you my own personal opinion. I have no problem schools teaching evolution. I have no problem with that. But they also need to teach the other side of the coin. The possibility of evolution and the possibility of creationisms, and let the students decide. But when you teach something out of, from a perspective of just information, this is a theory that one of the scientists had come up with. Yeah, it's a faulty theory, but it's a theory that it's important for us to understand this is what he thought of. But when I teach it as truth is different than when I teach it as just mere knowledge and information and theory. See, but if I do that, I also need to teach the other side of the coin, which is there's also another, we can call it theory of creationism, but that is not being taught, at least I know in some states. And you can understand the bias towards atheism in the world of academia. Yeah. And that's why we, as Christians, need to step it up and then be able to counter this uphill battle. Yes.
Aren't some religious private schools, like, they're basically banning
Yeah, that's true, but you just have to be wealthy enough to send your kids to private schools. But yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. Many of the private schools that we have near the area I live in, they teach Christian biblical. Yeah, you can choose to do so. Yes, ma'am.
I like that you said one flaw with what they're saying is that particles can become living things. But that's the basis of what we believe. We were dust, right?
Yes.
So that's an argument against
Very
that
good.
one.
We were dust, but we are not just dust. What they believe in is that we are just dust. Just dust, see? But we are not just dust. We have the breath of life from God. You mention God and, then they get all annoyed with you. Because that's the person they're trying to disprove. But also think about it. Think about it. Would you rather be... suggested meetings. There you go. Oh, I had a little video with me. 2 minutes if you... Think about it. Would you rather be you? Rehan. Would you rather be blindly evolved individual or intentionally created individual? Of course. What would you rather be? Not only that, let me tell you this. If you, Rehan, came here by accident, then I can remove you by incident if you stand in my way. You see? What's your worth? What's your value? You're here by accident. Get out of my way. I can kill you if I want to. Because you're here by accident. You see? Where is your inherent worth? Where does it come from? Where is your value as a person? That cannot come from evolution. It has to be bestowed upon you, conferred upon you from a person of value and worth. God. Do you see? So there's existential dilemmas with evolution, not just philosophical and scientific, existential. In other words, they have to do with your life and your meaning and your purpose.
I think that's why they have such a bleak outlook. The quotes that you...
Absolutely, because how can you say, the purpose of life? If I were to be asked, what is the purpose of my life? To glorify the Lord Jesus Christ and to be Christ-like. They can't have that answer. The purpose of life is to basically get all the toys that you can get out of this world, because eventually you're going to cease to exist and you're going to come back to the world that you came from. So, get as much power, possessions, and all that as much as you can. Might makes right. So anyways, you get the idea. Yes, sir.
My understanding is the Catholic Church is blending in with the evolution, saying that we're from monkeys and God.
Sure, good point. And I'll let John answer your question. Please answer Edward's question. It's a good point, and we talked about this with John. Will.
So that theory, I'm sorry.
Be good, Yarantino.
That theory is called theistic evolution, and we talked about it with Sayyidina, and it does go against the writings of the Church Fathers and their knowledge. The Church Fathers specifically stated that man was created from dust and will return to dust, and that is a literal meaning according to Saint Peter of Alexandria, right? And if we say that, we came from monkeys, you can't take that verse as a literal meaning. That's my understanding of it.
I love you, John. Thank you. Well said. Does that answer your question? So it
does, but there's so much facts and missing links and missing chains that there's no reason why they would bow down to such a theory.
To appeal to a community of scientists, basically. And I wouldn't generalize. When I say the Catholic Church, maybe a subgroup of the church, but I wouldn't generalize and say the Catholic Church at large is actually thinking with that thought. Because I don't believe so. But some may be doing that to appeal to the scientific communities. Yes.
You said that why don't humans evolve? Well, or like high school teachers, they say that like humans don't evolve because we have technology now. Like in the winter, we don't have to evolve because we have winter clothing, so we don't have to evolve to the next step. Because you said that that why don't humans evolve to the next level if we've been evolving?
So what's the answer? Okay, this is a good point. So what's the answer? What's the answer of why we haven't evolved? What does winter have to do with it?
Because technology, like we can make our own clothing to make us warm, so we don't have to evolve and have more hair on our arms to make us warm.
Very good. But that assumes, good point, but that assumes that when I mean evolution, I'm only looking at just more hair. But that's not what I mean by evolution. Evolution is not just one part of you having more hair to cover you from winter. It's your shape, not only the amount of hair you have, which varies, but your shape. Your head looks this way. So it's not just that.
The macro, not the micro.
Right.
So what they're saying is the micro, and it could happen.
Right.
But the macro is not.
And the micro could definitely, adaptability is we as a Christian Orthodox teaching doesn't have any problem with adaptability. You see? I once read that why do Middle Easterns have long eyelashes? Middle Easterns have long eyelashes?
Yeah.
Why?
Keep the sun out of their
Huh?
eye. Keep the sun out of their eye.
Dirt. That's a good point. Sandstorms. Middle East, deserts. And so you have long eyelashes for sands. Some form of adaptability in your makeup. You see, and then you can also talk about different cultures. The Asians and why do they have? I don't want to get too controversial and politically incorrect. But every culture has what's called the adaptability for the environment. That is not evolution. Somebody had his hand up or her hand up.
So how does evolution explain complexity in the human mind, like behavioral, emotional, psychological, spiritual?
A very good point. It doesn't. That's the answer. It doesn't. The complexity, and you read a book by, his name is Michael Behe. Oh, here it is. Darwin's Black Box. He actually talks about your point. The complexity of the human cell from a biological standpoint, and also the complexity of human emotions, love and hatred and all that. That's kind of the moral thing that I'm talking about. Darwin's Black Box. The Design Evolution, and Darwin on Trial by Philip Johnson is also another book. There's like a number of references. Do you have time? I want to be sensitive to your schedule and time because this has been a back-to-back sessions, but I want to be sensitive to your time. Can you allow maybe 3 to 4 minutes of a quick animated video? Sure. Okay, all right. All right.
You hear this one a lot. Science has proven evolution, therefore evolution is true. Since evolution is true and Christians don't believe it, then Christians don't believe science and they aren't rational people. Really, let's put that claim to the test. First off, evolution in the sense that things change is evident. No rational person disputes that. Therefore, rational Christians believe it. We can observe change. But evolution in the sense that life came from non-life and then that life began to randomly generate new genetic information and over time it eventually produced humans is something entirely different and something that quite honestly doesn't hold up against science. In other words, evolution in the sense of molecules to man is not scientifically plausible and therefore should not be viewed as scientific fact. Quite honestly, it is in great opposition to science, that is, observation. observational science, the kind of science we can test and repeat and use our five senses to understand. Science demonstrates that over time, living organisms lose genetic information. They don't gain it. That same science demonstrates that life doesn't arise from non-life. Follow along, if you would. Fact one. There is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to an organism's genetic code. None. That pretty much refutes evolution right away, because there's no way to go from a fish to an amphibian without adding new information, right? If living organisms cannot produce new genetic information, how can anything gradually change into something of higher intelligence or form or complexity? That is, how can anything evolve from an amoeba to a man without adding new genetic information? The answer, of course, is that it can't, plain and simple. Now, some have speculated and they've imagined all kinds of things, and they brought in artists to produce creative renderings based on guesses, and they have been successful in telling a very convincing story that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. But those are just drawings, people. They're just stories. But what we really observe is humans are humans and apes are apes. Now, if fact one buried evolutionary thinking deep into the Precambrian soil, this next fact, fact two, tosses so much sediment on it that not even the greatest team of paleontologists with the latest subterranean gizmo could dig up the remains. Check this out. Never, again, never has it been observed that life can come from non-life. So here are two major scientific evidences against evolution. I reiterate for clarity, life has never been observed to come from non-life, and there is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to the genetic code of an organism. So molecules and man evolution doesn't really make scientific sense. Yet we are all here, and life is all around us in various forms. Although evolution cannot account for this, the Bible can. The Bible reveals that the all-powerful, all-knowing, supernatural God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, and all life according to its kinds, that is, each with its own set of genetic information. So, again, what the Bible reveals makes sense of what we see and understand. Evolution does not. Enough said.
What do y'all think? This is something you can show your high school child. What's the address? I'll be more than happy to send you a link of it.
With the presentations, if you don't mind.
You can have the entire presentation if you want. And actually, what I would love to do, with the permission of His Grace, is that we can upload these presentations on the apologetic sections of the diocese website, so you can access them. Just as long as you don't make copies and sell them and make money out of them. but for the use your personal use for service, that's what they're there for. It's to be shared and amongst everyone. So you can access them. I like this video because the way it's developed, it appeals to the kind of the younger, if you will, has that methodology. Do you see what I'm saying? The artistic style. So it's attractive, something that it's good for them to hear and see. All right, I think we may conclude. And any comments, Sabuna or Sayedna? Any comments or questions? All right. So we'll meet up again. Sabuna, do you want to?
I think we can go right away to the workshop, and then we take 15 minutes break, and then we come back for another lecture. So we can have the workshop is with George.
Is it?
Okay. And our introduction. Yeah. Okay. All right, I think this is our workshop.
Right now?
Okay. Stretch. Stretch in your place, not outside the room, don't do anything else. Don't move more than 5 centimeters.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you want to talk now?
By the way, the workshop will be an exercise, so you'll have some things to actually work on. be questions and answers that you actually have to write down.
دكتور بقى صح حضرتك انا مبسوط ان شفت حضرتك الحمد لله يوم